tours moved silently through the fluorescent-lit corridors of the Nevada military base. The hum of air conditioning, the faint clatter of equipment, and the occasional thud of distant footsteps were the soundtrack of her nights. Everyone around her assumed she was just another cleaning staff member, another unnoticed presence meant to mop floors, empty trash cans, and sweep dust from the edges of the facility. No one paid her much attention, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Her small frame, unremarkable uniform, and soft-spoken manner made her invisible to the busy officers, scientists, and contractors who considered her presence negligible. She had learned early on that invisibility was a weapon. It allowed her to observe, to memorize, to plan without suspicion. Every glance, every casual conversation, every lapse in security she noticed was a puzzle piece. She noted which doors clicked open too easily, which corridors had blind spots in the camera feeds, and which officers were careless with their credentials. Her mind worked like a finely tuned machine, cataloging patterns and storing them for later. While others dismissed her, she knew the rhythms of the base better than most personnel. The young Lieutenant Hawthorne was perhaps the only person who occasionally acknowledged her existence. He would nod politely in the mornings, exchange casual words, sometimes ask how her night shift was going, would smile softly, offering minimal responses. She allowed these interactions because they made her seem human, harmless, approachable. Yet every word he spoke, every movement he made, every badge he carried, she catalogued meticulously. To him, she was a friendly presence. To her, he was an unwitting source of critical information. As pushed the mop across the polished floors of the research wing, she kept her eyes on the shadows, noting the patterns of security guards and technicians. Each shift was a rehearsal, each routine observed and committed to memory. She could navigate the base blindfolded if she had to, knowing the exact distance between doorways, the precise location of cameras, and the timing of patrols. Small details mattered: the angle of a security camera lens, the frequency of check-ins, the habits of the staff. To anyone else, it was just a cleaning routine. To her, it was reconnaissance. She paused near a lab door and pretended to inspect a smudge on the floor. Behind the reinforced glass, a team of scientists debated the latest AI prototype. Their conversation was loud enough for her to catch fragments of information: algorithms, neural mapping, experimental protocols. She made mental notes, understanding the significance of every term even if she pretended to be absorbed in sweeping. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She, the unassuming cleaner, was gathering intelligence on technology that even many of the base's higher-ranking officers barely understood. A sudden sound, a door closing, made her glance up. A security guard passed by, barely noticing her presence. She smiled politely, almost shyly, letting the smile linger just enough to appear natural. The guard nodded and continued on his route. In those fleeting moments, she observed the layout of the nearby control panels and the positioning of the cameras. Her mind was a blueprint. Every detail, every minor oversight, every predictable pattern was stored for later. The past flashed briefly in her mind. Before arriving at the base, she had been someone entirely different. Years of covert training and intelligence work, years spent in operations that demanded silence and precision, had shaped her into a person who could move unseen, think ahead, and adapt instantly. She had walked into this life under the guise of cleaning staff to protect something far greater than herself. Her family, safe overseas, depended on her discretion. Every smile, every casual mop stroke, every polite nod was calculated. In her world, invisibility was survival. As the night deepened, the base grew quieter. The hum of machinery, the occasional beep from monitors, and the echo of distant footsteps were amplified in the stillness. Moved to the central corridor, where security cameras monitored every corner. She paused, observing a minor blind spot where the camera's angle missed a small section of the hallway. Her mind recorded it automatically. Later, she would exploit such weaknesses, not recklessly, but with precision, like a chess player anticipating the opponent's moves. Despite her meticulous planning, she maintained a facade of ordinariness. The mop she carried, the gloves she wore, the faint scent of cleaning solution clinging to her uniform, all were part of the act. No one suspected that behind the calm demeanor was a mind analyzing every vulnerability, every routine, every opportunity. Her presence was a contradiction, ordinary to everyone else, extraordinary in the hidden depths of her purpose. She reached the break room and pretended to refill her bucket, humming softly to herself. Lieutenant Hawthorne entered, holding a cup of coffee. "Long night?" he asked casually, offering a friendly smile. She returned it, nodding. "Yes, sir, just keeping things clean." To him, it was a harmless interaction, small talk. To her, it was data, tone, inflection, body language, and timing, all crucial pieces of intelligence in a game no one knew she was playing. Knew that every unnoticed action, every assumption that she was harmless was an advantage. The base's personnel underestimated her completely. They never questioned why she memorized patterns, why she lingered near certain doors, or why she took particular routes. Her invisibility was her greatest weapon, and she wielded it with the patience of someone who had spent years mastering silence. The longer she remained unnoticed, the stronger her position became. As the clock approached midnight, she made her way toward the experimental wing, glancing casually at officers passing by. In her mind, she ran through sequences, contingency plans, and escape routes. Every observation was another brick in the foundation of her mission. No one suspected that the unremarkable woman with a mop in her hand was quietly laying the groundwork for an operation that could cripple the base's security, or expose secrets hidden even from the highest-ranking officials. By the end of her shift, returned the mop to its storage closet, her uniform still spotless, her expression calm and composed. To anyone observing, she had simply completed her nightly duties, but in reality she had walked the entire base mentally, memorized patterns and confirmed weaknesses. She was invisible, yes, but she was also vigilant, calculating, and prepared. She was a ghost among the living, a presence no one noticed, but a force no one could ignore when the time came. Torres left the corridor quietly, her footsteps fading into the distance. Behind her, the base continued its work, oblivious to the fact that the woman they dismissed as cleaning staff had already infiltrated their routines, memorized their patterns, and positioned herself to change everything. Her night of observation was just the beginning, and by the time anyone realized what had happened, it would be far too late. The base's night shift moved on, oblivious to the invisible eyes studying them from the shadows. Torres had returned to her quarters for a brief pause, but even there she couldn't let her mind rest. She replayed every detail of her nightly patrol, the way guards shifted positions, the officers' careless habits, the sounds of the lab equipment that hummed like a quiet heartbeat. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous weapons were not guns or bombs, they were knowledge and timing. And she had both in abundance. Beyond the polished floors and fluorescent lights, the base was a labyrinth of secrets. Locked doors led to experimental labs, server rooms, and communications centers. Every swipe, every security clearance, every whispered conversation was another data point for her. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked this path countless times in her mind before taking a single physical step. While most employees assumed her presence was incidental, she observed everything. The slight hesitation of a technician approaching a console, the way an officer checked his watch nervously, the hidden camera angles that left tiny blind spots in surveillance. The experimental AI lab was the heart of the base's operations, a room only accessible to personnel with Level 4 clearance, yet didn't need clearance cards or codes to know what was happening inside. Her background in intelligence had trained her to interpret patterns, anticipate routines, and exploit lapses. Standing near a vent, pretending to polish the floor, she listened carefully. The scientists debated neural mapping algorithms and data compression protocols. Words like autonomous override and encrypted payload floated into her mind, registering not just as jargon, but as the pieces of a puzzle she intended to solve. A sudden sound made her duck slightly. A security officer's footsteps echoed down the hallway. She straightened immediately, smiling politely as he passed by, a broom in hand to maintain the of ordinary work. Once he was gone, she returned to scanning her surroundings. She knew that patience was her ally. Each shift, each routine observation was a step closer to achieving her objective. Even minor errors by the staff became opportunities. An open door, a badge left unattended, a misdirected glance. They were all gifts she silently catalogued. Her mind drifted briefly to the Lieutenant Hawthorne, who had grown fond of her casual demeanor. He believed she was harmless, a simple cleaner just trying to make a living. Sometimes she found herself smiling softly at him, appreciating the irony. A single nod or polite reply, seemingly insignificant, was a tool. Every interaction was carefully measured. Every word she spoke reinforced the image of an ordinary woman. Yet behind that mask, she was plotting, calculating, and preparing for a sequence of events that could change the base forever. Moved toward the server corridor, noting the patterns of guards and technicians as she passed. Some were predictable, following the same path every night. Others varied slightly, but never enough to escape her attention. She memorized the position of every security camera and noted the blind spots where shadows could hide her movements. Her past experiences had taught her that even the smallest misstep could ruin an operation. This was not just a cleaning shift. It was reconnaissance, practice, and planning, all executed with flawless precision. The base's communication center was another area of interest. Officers logged encrypted messages, checked reports, and coordinated surveillance operations. Keen ears captured snippets, time-sensitive orders, personnel rotations, and locations of sensitive equipment. Every fragment was cataloged mentally, stored for later use. While most employees considered their internal discussions safe, she had learned long ago that careless words were often the weakest link in security. The knowledge she accumulated was far more powerful than any physical weapon. She paused near a door that led to a restricted research lab, pretending to adjust the cleaning supplies in her cart. Through the glass, she observed a heated discussion between two scientists about the AI project's neural network. Their debate was intense, voices raised in frustration over data inconsistencies. Noted the specifics, not because she needed to understand them fully, but because the internal tension revealed vulnerabilities, disagreements that might distract personnel at crucial moments. Even the human element of error played in her favor. As the hours passed, the base grew quieter. The distant hum of machinery and faint beep of monitors became the ambient backdrop of her surveillance. She moved seamlessly through hallways, sweeping floors and emptying trash bins with the practiced motions of a professional cleaner. Yet every movement was deliberate, every pause intentional. The unremarkable nature of her work was a cloak, hiding the fact that she was gathering intelligence with precision and patience. She was both present and invisible at the same time, a ghost navigating a maze of secrets. The ventilation shafts provided her with a unique perspective. She had spent weeks observing air currents, listening to the echoes, and noting which shafts connected to sensitive areas. Tonight, she traced the faint sounds of typing and conversation, imagining the exact layout of the rooms above. She could navigate the base blindfolded, knowing the location of each door, panel, and hidden corner. Her familiarity with the base was not born overnight. It was the result of careful observation, meticulous planning, and the discipline instilled by her years in intelligence operations. Her thoughts returned to her ultimate goal. The AI prototype in the lab was not just a piece of technology, it was the key to understanding the base's true power. But raw data alone was not enough. She needed access, timing, and precision. She needed to be invisible until the exact moment she chose to act, and she was ready. Each night she spent cleaning, observing, and memorizing was an investment. By the time she took her next step, she would not be merely a cleaner in the eyes of the base, she would be a force that no one could ignore. Glanced at the clock. Midnight was approaching and the corridors were mostly empty. She allowed herself a brief moment to rest, leaning against a wall, pretending to catch her breath. Her mind, however, remained sharp and alert, reviewing every observation, every security pattern, and every weak point she had identified over countless nights. She was preparing for more than an intrusion. She was preparing for a revelation, an operation that would expose the vulnerabilities the base believed were impenetrable. Finally, as the first hints of dawn approached, she pushed her cleaning cart down the final corridor and returned it to storage. Her uniform was spotless, her demeanor calm, her work apparently routine. But beneath the surface, every step, every movement, and every glance had been carefully planned. Torres was no ordinary cleaner. She was an observer, a strategist, a ghost, and the stage was now set for her next moves. When the time came, the base would realize far too late that the invisible woman they had ignored had been orchestrating events that would change everything. The night was thick and still, the desert wind rattling faintly against the base's perimeter fences. Torres moved through the empty corridors with her usual quiet precision, each step measured, each glance deliberate. By now, she knew the base as intimately as any officer, or perhaps better. Every door code, every patrol rotation, every camera blind spot was etched into her memory. Yet the moment of passive observation was over. Tonight, she would begin testing the limits of her intelligence. Knowledge alone was not enough. She needed access, timing, and opportunity. She paused in the storage hallway, brushing a hand over her mop cart as if inspecting it, but her attention was on a careless officer near the server room. Lieutenant Hawthorne, oblivious as always, had left his badge on the counter while checking some reports. To anyone else, it was a minor lapse. It was a golden opportunity. She moved slowly, ensuring no cameras captured her subtle approach, and allowed her eyes to memorize every detail on the badge. The embossed numbers, the magnetic strip, the tiny scuff mark near the corner. Every detail was another key in her growing mental toolkit. Her mind drifted briefly to her past, a past she had meticulously concealed. Years before, she had been trained in covert operations, a life of high-stakes intelligence work that demanded absolute precision, discipline, and secrecy. Missions had taken her to foreign countries, operating in the shadows, always invisible, always unnoticed. A single mistake could have meant death, not just for her, but for her family. It was that training that allowed her to navigate the base with such confidence, to plan moves several steps ahead while appearing harmless. She carried those skills like a second skin, invisible but deadly. Approached the lab corridors, now empty except for the faint hum of machinery. Her observations had revealed patterns over the past weeks. Certain shifts left the neural mapping prototype unattended for brief windows. Security guards rotated predictably, and some officers relied too heavily on automated protocols. Every pattern was a puzzle, and she had learned to predict the base's rhythm like a seasoned musician anticipating the next note. Timing would be critical. Any deviation could expose her. As she moved past a row of server consoles, she noticed a junior technician fumbling with a terminal. He muttered under his breath about a corrupted data entry, paused just long enough to note which systems were most vulnerable, which logs were routinely unchecked, and which protocols relied solely on human oversight. A flicker of excitement passed through her. These small cracks in the armor could be leveraged later. Her mental map of the base expanded with every interaction, every observation, every minute detail cataloged for the night when she would move from observation to action. The lieutenant's casual conversations earlier in the evening also provided critical intelligence. Had listened as he described upcoming security drills, the rotation of high-level officers, and the vulnerabilities in certain access points. She committed every word to memory, noting even the unconscious tics and habits that might reveal weakness. His trust in her harmlessness was her greatest asset. By appearing ordinary, she had gained access to information that even higher-ranking officers would have guarded fiercely. Knowledge, she reminded herself, was power, but only if wielded with precision. She paused at a window that overlooked the prototype lab. Inside, scientists were discussing encryption protocols for the AI neural core. Pretended to wipe the glass, but her mind absorbed every word. Autonomous override, encrypted payload, data isolation. These terms were not just technical jargon, they were potential points of leverage. Her fingers brushed against the mop handle, concealed tools within, her heart steady, her breathing measured. She did not rush. Haste was the enemy of precision. Every action, every observation, every calculation had to align perfectly with the opportunity she had meticulously planned. Her eyes lingered on the badge she had memorized. In another week she would use it, carefully replicated, subtly altered, invisible to the automated security systems. Tonight it was enough to store the data mentally, reviewing every detail to ensure no mistakes. A single error, even a small scuff mark overlooked, could trigger suspicion. She reminded herself of her training: patience, observation, anticipation. She had waited years for opportunities like this, and she would not squander a single one. Moved into the ventilation shafts, another pathway she had mapped over the past weeks. The cool metal against her hands was familiar, almost comforting. The shafts allowed her to bypass cameras and avoid patrolling guards. From this vantage, she could hear faint snippets of conversation from the labs, servers, and offices below. Each sound, each pattern, each movement was logged in her mind. The base, sprawling and high-tech, was transparent to her. Invisibility was her shield, observation her weapon, and intelligence her greatest strength. A sudden alert in the hallway below caused her to freeze briefly, listening carefully. A technician had noticed a minor anomaly in the network, a glitch that would likely be dismissed in minutes. Smiled faintly. Every flaw, every oversight, every small human error was a door waiting to be opened. She continued silently through the shafts, noting which security panels were accessible and which were monitored only sporadically. Every calculation brought her closer to the moment when knowledge would become action. Her mind turned to the final phase of tonight's reconnaissance. She needed to confirm the weak points in access control. Moving carefully, she traced the route from the prototype lab to the central server room. Every corridor, every turn, every door lock was mapped in her memory. She noted the timing of automated doors, the pause between security alerts, the frequency of guard rotations. Everything was predictable if one observed closely, and she had observed with unmatched diligence. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the consequences if she succeeded. The prototype neural core was not just a piece of technology, it was the base's crown jewel. In the wrong hands, or perhaps in the hands of someone who understood the danger of keeping it secret, it could alter the balance of power. Its goal was not destruction, it was exposure. She intended to reveal what was hidden in plain sight, to show the truth that officers, scientists, and administrators were too arrogant or distracted to see. By the time she returned to her mop cart near the storage closet, the base was quiet, the night nearly over. She placed the cart neatly in its slot, adjusted her gloves, and took a deep breath. To anyone observing, she had completed her shift flawlessly. But inside, she was a strategist, a planner, and a ghost. The knowledge she had gathered tonight, codes, schedules, vulnerabilities, was now a weapon, waiting for the precise moment to be used. Her patience, her invisibility, and her meticulous planning had positioned her perfectly. Torres walked down the final corridor, her uniform spotless, her demeanor calm. Her presence was unremarkable, her role inconspicuous. Yet behind the mask of ordinariness she was prepared. Knowledge was power, and she had amassed it in abundance. The base, secure in its arrogance, remained oblivious to the silent observer who had infiltrated its routines. By the time anyone realized the threat, it would be too late. Tonight had been observation, the next stage would be action. And when that moment came, the base would finally understand that invisibility could be far more dangerous than brute force. The first anomalies were subtle, small, almost imperceptible. The base's automated surveillance cameras occasionally froze for a fraction of a second, long enough to miss a guard's movement. The technicians dismissed it as routine glitches, attributing it to software bugs or network latency. No one suspected intentional interference. But Torres, moving silently through the shadowed corridors, knew better. She had orchestrated each minor anomaly with precision, testing the system's vulnerabilities while remaining invisible. Every freeze, every delay, every unlogged moment was a thread she wove into a larger plan, a plan that the officers and scientists of the base could neither see nor understand. She had returned to the ventilation shafts, her preferred vantage point, from which she could observe both personnel and machinery. From here, she could hear the faint hum of server fans, the occasional beeps of monitors, the murmured conversations of night shift technicians. She cataloged every sound, every movement, every habit, turning them into patterns she would exploit later. Each minor glitch she had introduced was unnoticed but deliberate. A camera feed paused just long enough to create a blind spot, a log entry delayed to obscure her presence. She was invisible, untouchable, and methodical. Her heart never raced. Her training had taught her that panic was the enemy of precision. She moved carefully, keeping her gestures natural while her mind ran through calculations, anticipating potential errors and planning contingencies. If a guard passed too close to a server, she would stall or retreat slightly, ensuring that her presence remained undetected. She had learned early in her career that success depended not on brute force, but on patience, observation, and timing. The more unnoticed she remained, the stronger her position became. Meanwhile, the technicians began to notice irregularities. Logs didn't match actions. Cameras appeared to skip sequences. One IT analyst, a young man named Malik, raised his concern with his supervisor, who brushed it off with a casual wave. "Probably just a software hiccup," he said. Malik frowned, sensing something more, but he had no proof, smiled faintly from her hidden vantage point. Their dismissal was perfect. It reinforced the illusion of normalcy while the cracks in the system widened. Through the ventilation shafts, observed a team of scientists working late. They debated encrypted payloads, data isolation, and autonomous control protocols. Their conversation was loud enough for her to pick up key terms, but not their intentions. Each miscommunication, each small dispute, each distraction they created for themselves was a gift to her. While they argued over encryption standards and security protocols, she observed every weak point in the network, every reliance on automated systems, every human oversight. These details were critical for the moment she would transition from observation to action. Her preparation was meticulous. Every movement she had made in the past weeks, memorizing patrol routes, camera angles, and blind spots, was converging into a single, executable plan. She had studied the security rotations and predicted the timing of each shift change. She had memorized which doors relied on electronic access and which could be manipulated manually. Every minor error by a guard, every casual conversation about system flaws, every overlooked protocol was another piece of the puzzle. She was assembling a complete mental map, an invisible blueprint that only she could navigate. A sudden alert on one of the servers below made her pause. The junior technician had noticed a discrepancy, a minor inconsistency in the logs, but before he could investigate further, his supervisor dismissed it, allowed herself a faint smirk. She had accounted for this. Every anomaly she introduced was subtle enough to be ignored at first glance. It was the human tendency to dismiss minor irregularities that worked in her favor. The base personnel believed the system was infallible, yet it was precisely this arrogance that left them vulnerable. She shifted her position, moving along the shaft to maintain coverage of the prototype lab. From here, she could see the AI neural core prototype, the central focus of the base's top-secret operations. Scientists worked diligently, unaware that the system they trusted implicitly was subtly under her influence. Every small glitch she had introduced, the frozen cameras, the delayed logs, the unrecorded badge swipes, was designed to create a network of weaknesses. When the time came, these weaknesses would allow her to bypass controls without detection. Her plan was not reckless. Each action was calculated, each test deliberate. She moved to a vent overlooking a critical access corridor and observed a guard making his rounds. He followed the same pattern nightly: check the consoles, adjust the lighting, swipe his badge, then return to the security office. She noted the exact duration of each stop, the angle of his vision, and the timing of the automated doors. These details would later inform her movement through the facility, ensuring that her infiltration could proceed without confrontation. By midnight, the first real effects of her manipulations were evident. Certain terminals displayed incorrect timestamps, others appeared to log phantom entries. The tech teams initially blamed human error, but subtle panic began to ripple through the late-night staff. Remained calm, observing each reaction, noting which individuals were vigilant and which were easily distracted. These observations would be crucial for her next phase, the active breach. She understood that success depended not just on access to the prototype, but on the predictability of human responses to system failures. She reflected on the base's security culture. Officers relied heavily on automated systems, assuming that technology alone could prevent breaches. Human oversight, they believed, was a safety net. Yet in their arrogance, they overlooked the simplest vulnerabilities: inattentive personnel, predictable routines, and the unremarkable figure of a cleaner. Its advantage lay in their perception of her as ordinary. It was a weapon she wielded silently, using invisibility, observation, and the slightest technological manipulations to create an environment where her presence could go entirely unnoticed. The hours passed, each one confirming her mental map. She traced the route from the prototype lab to the communications center, noting minor lapses in security coverage. She had discovered which cameras could be looped, which doors could be unlocked without tripping alarms, and which terminals were rarely monitored. Every detail was stored for the final phase. She moved like a shadow, silent, deliberate, precise. Her actions were a combination of strategy and patience, the hallmark of a trained operative who understood the value of preparation. As dawn approached, emerged briefly into a supply corridor, brushing dust off the shelves to maintain the illusion of ordinary work. Her uniform remained spotless, her demeanor calm. She had achieved her objectives for the night, observing the base, testing system vulnerabilities, and subtly manipulating digital systems. The first phase of her operation, establishing unseen control over the facility's environment, was complete. She knew that the base would remain unaware of her influence, and that this ignorance would be crucial for her next moves. She paused, glancing at the AI lab once more. The scientists continued their work, oblivious to the fact that their systems were compromised. Her small interventions, the frozen cameras, delayed logs, and subtle manipulations, had created a network of weaknesses that no one would notice until it was too late. She had turned the base's reliance on technology into a blind spot, and in doing so, she had positioned herself perfectly for the next stage. Observation had transitioned into influence, and soon, influence would become action. Returning to her storage area, she quietly organized her cleaning supplies, maintaining the of an ordinary employee. But beneath the surface, her mind was active, replaying every observation, recalculating every step, and preparing for the moment when she would move from the shadows into decisive action. The base, secure in its arrogance, remained unaware that the silent, unnoticed cleaner had already begun to bend its systems to her will. The stage was set, and the next night would bring the true test of her planning, skill, and patience. The desert wind howled faintly outside, rattling the perimeter fencing as Tors prepared for the next phase of her operation. Observation and subtle manipulation had been completed. Now it was time for action. She moved with deliberate calm, her uniform spotless, her demeanor ordinary, carrying the illusion of the base's harmless cleaner. Yet beneath that, every nerve, every thought, every movement was controlled, calculated, precise. This night would test all her preparation, all her training, and all her patience. The line between invisibility and exposure had thinned, and she would cross it with perfect timing. Her first target was the prototype AI neural mapping core, the heart of the base's top-secret operations. For weeks, she had studied the lab's security patterns, guard rotations, badge scans, camera angles, and blind spots. Every shift had been a rehearsal in her mind. Every human error, every overlooked security measure had been cataloged and analyzed. Tonight, she would exploit them. Her approach was not reckless. It was deliberate, precise, and untraceable if executed correctly. Began by looping surveillance cameras in the hallway leading to the lab. The glitches she had introduced earlier served as a perfect cover. Security staff noticed minor feed disruptions but dismissed them as software hiccups. She had timed the loop to last exactly 2 minutes, enough to move unseen through the corridor and reach the lab's reinforced doors. Each step was deliberate, silent, and calculated to avoid the faintest hint of detection. Her training in covert operations allowed her to navigate complex spaces while remaining virtually invisible. The first physical barrier was a badge swipe door, level 4 access. A careless officer had left his badge exposed during an earlier check and had memorized every detail, every mark, every magnetic code. With her concealed tools, she replicated the swipe flawlessly. The door clicked open, and she slipped inside, her heartbeat steady, her movements controlled. Inside, the lab was quiet, the faint hum of servers and cooling systems filling the space. She paused briefly, scanning the room, confirming that all personnel were at their stations or distracted with experimental work. Approached the AI prototype carefully, her eyes noting the placement of security sensors, the proximity of cameras, and the positions of the scientists. She had timed their routines to perfection. Any deviation could have triggered suspicion. She reached into her mop handle, which concealed a micro drive and subtle electronic tools, and began the delicate process of copying the neural mapping core's critical data. Every action was precise, measured, and silent. One slip, one miscalculation, and the entire operation could be exposed. As she worked, a shadow passed near the doorway. A guard had come unexpectedly to check the terminal nearby. Froze, her body perfectly still, her expression calm. The guard glanced toward her, saw the mop in her hand, and assumed she was tidying the floor. She offered a small, polite nod and smiled, just enough to appear ordinary. The guard moved on, oblivious to the microdrive she had hidden inside the mop, and she allowed herself a faint breath of relief. Every detail had been calculated, but human unpredictability was always a risk she had to mitigate. With the microdrive secured, she prepared the next stage. The base's emergency backup systems were her next target. For weeks, she had studied the network's vulnerabilities, the timing of automated alerts, and the dependency on human response. By subtly manipulating terminals and looping digital logs, she created a blind spot large enough to allow for a temporary power and communication disruption. The operation required split-second timing. One error could trigger alarms, expose her position, and ruin the entire mission. Initiated the sequence. A faint pause in the network occurred, unnoticed by most staff. Cameras flickered briefly, monitors displayed outdated timestamps, and the lab's environmental controls skipped a cycle. Minor anomalies, easy to dismiss as software quirks, but each carefully orchestrated. She monitored the reaction of the staff. Some hesitated, others shrugged it off, and a few began troubleshooting, unaware that the source of the disruption was invisible. Her advantage lay in their over-reliance on automated systems and their inability to suspect the unassuming cleaner among them. The storm outside grew louder, the wind rattling vents and doors, masking faint noises she might have made. Moved to the secondary control panel, carefully looping data feeds and disabling redundant backups. This stage was critical. It ensured that any response to her intrusion would be delayed, giving her and her extraction team enough time to complete the operation. She had rehearsed this moment mentally countless times, calculating every second, every movement, every possibility. Her preparation was absolute, her confidence unwavering. Suddenly, one of the junior scientists moved unexpectedly, approaching the terminal where she had initiated the data loop. froze briefly, assessing the risk. He typed rapidly, attempting to correct what he perceived as a glitch. Her heart remained steady. Every potential variable had been accounted for. The system's false logs created the illusion of normal operation, buying her the crucial seconds needed to continue. She continued her work calmly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow brushing past objects. Minutes stretched, and the power disruption she had orchestrated began to ripple outward. Small systems went offline briefly, automated messages failed to send, and cameras along the main corridors flickered and froze in sequence. Officers began noticing inconsistencies, but their responses were slow, uncertain. Watched, calculating, waiting for the precise moment to complete the transfer. Her preparation had ensured that human error and automated delays worked in her favor, creating a perfect storm in which she could operate undetected. With the microdrive successfully and secured, she retraced her steps carefully, ensuring no trace of her movements remained. Cameras were looped, logs manipulated, and minor anomalies masked her passage. She moved back through the corridors with the calm precision of a professional, aware that the smallest misstep could reveal her presence. Her training in covert operations had taught her the importance of patience and composure, and she relied on it fully now. Finally, she returned the mop to its storage closet, her uniform spotless, her demeanor calm and ordinary. The lab continued its work, the scientists oblivious to the disruption, the anomalies, and the invisible presence that had operated entirely within the system. Tors had transitioned from observer to active agent, executing a complex plan with precision, patience, and skill. She had tested the base's vulnerabilities, exploited human oversight, and secured the prototype's most critical data. Stepping back into the corridor, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her work was far from over. The base was still active, unaware of the extent to which its systems had been compromised. But she had achieved the critical first stage: infiltration, acquisition, and subtle disruption. The stage was set for the next phase, where the base itself would begin to unravel, powerless to prevent the consequences of its own complacency. As she left the lab area, glanced back once, a faint smile on her lips. No one had noticed, no one had suspected, and no one would. The invisible cleaner had become a ghost in the system, moving through the base undetected, shaping events in ways that would soon leave everyone reeling. Tonight had proven one truth: appearances could be deceiving, invisibility could be powerful, and patience was a weapon that few could match. The base would soon learn that even the most ordinary-seeming presence could control the loudest chaos. The base was humming with activity as the early morning hours approached, yet beneath the of routine, the first signs of disruption were already spreading. Tors moved through the hallways with the calm, precise confidence of someone whose every step had been rehearsed 1,000 times. She had completed the critical phase, copying the neural mapping core data, looping cameras, and creating subtle anomalies in the network. Now it was time for the ripple effect, the stage where observation and infiltration became full-scale disruption. She paused briefly in a supply corridor, her mop cart neatly in place, gloves spotless, expression composed. The base personnel were unaware of the invisible presence shaping the very environment around them. Computers flickered, alarms hesitated, and automated alerts failed to propagate. A faint shimmer on the main monitors showed the first signs of chaos. Some security feeds froze, timestamps skewed, and sensor logs recorded phantom entries. The anomalies were subtle but cumulative, and the longer they persisted unnoticed, the more vulnerable the base became. Through her vantage points, observed the guards responding to minor inconsistencies. A patrol officer paused, attempting to troubleshoot a security console, while another scanned the hallways, sensing something was off. Their uncertainty was exactly what she had predicted. Human error, over-reliance on automated systems, and predictable routines were vulnerabilities she had studied for weeks. She watched, noting each reaction, cataloging each misstep. By now, the base was blind to her presence, but increasingly aware that something was wrong, a paradox that would soon escalate. In the AI lab, the scientists noticed discrepancies in the neural mapping prototype logs. Experiments appeared incomplete, some data points missing, and certain autonomous functions inexplicably paused. Panic did not set in immediately, but frustration was visible. Discussions became heated as they attempted to troubleshoot the anomalies. Invisible among the shadows, observed from a ventilation shaft above. The tension was a tool. The human element of error and emotional response worked in her favor, providing the perfect environment for her next moves. Outside, the wind had strengthened, rattling fencing and doors, masking faint sounds of movement within the base. Moved swiftly but silently toward the central control room. Here, the cumulative effect of her manipulations would be most visible. Terminal screens flickered, access points cycled through loops, and the automated alarm system hesitated just long enough to create confusion. Officers attempted to coordinate responses but found their communications disrupted. Radios emitted static, networked alerts were delayed, and cameras displayed nothing but frozen images. The base was becoming disoriented, silent, blind, and vulnerable. A guard entered the hallway unexpectedly, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Froze, standing perfectly still, mop handle in hand as if mid-task. The guard's gaze swept past her without hesitation. He assumed she was tending to the corridor as usual. She allowed herself a faint smile, barely perceptible. This invisibility, the illusion of ordinariness, was her greatest asset. Every moment she remained unnoticed, every misperception about her role, increased the base's vulnerability and strengthened her control over the unfolding chaos. The central server room was her next focus. With precise timing, she manipulated terminals, rerouting backup systems and creating loops in the security network. Each sequence of commands was executed to perfection. Logs were altered, cameras temporarily disabled, and automated alerts suppressed. To anyone monitoring remotely, everything appeared normal at first glance. Yet the subtle glitches, creating a cascading effect that no technician could fully comprehend. The base's systems were failing incrementally, silently, as if an invisible hand were guiding the breakdown. Attention shifted to the communications hubs. Officers attempted to coordinate their response but found themselves talking over static, receiving contradictory data, or watching monitors that displayed outdated information. The frustration among personnel grew and tempers flared. This human element, the predictable stress response, was exactly what she needed. As confusion, her operational freedom increased. She had not just infiltrated the base physically. She had infiltrated its systems, its routines, and its very perception of reality. Meanwhile, in the experimental wing, the neural mapping prototype became increasingly erratic. Logs were misaligned, sensors unresponsive, and automated systems froze intermittently. Scientists attempted to troubleshoot, but every attempt seemed to trigger additional anomalies. They were fighting shadows, unaware that their systems had already been compromised by someone they assumed was merely a cleaner. Watched, mentally recording their reactions, noting the locations where panic first took hold, and the individuals most likely to falter under pressure. From the ventilation shafts, she had a near-perfect view of the chaos. Guards stumbled, technicians argued, and officers tried desperately to coordinate an effective response. Every system she had touched, cameras, sensors, communications, servers, was subtly manipulated, creating an environment where decisions were delayed and errors. The base, despite its technological sophistication, was rendered powerless against a single operative who had mastered the art of invisibility and precision. She moved back toward the prototype lab, checking one final sequence. The microdrive containing the neural core's data was secure, concealed in her mop handle, and ready for extraction. Every terminal she had manipulated, every loop she had installed, every subtle disruption had worked exactly as planned. The base was disoriented, chaotic, yet no one suspected the unassuming cleaner who walked among them. Invisibility, intelligence, and patience had turned into a tactical advantage, more powerful than any weapon. By 2:13 a.m., the culmination of her efforts became evident. Power flickered, communications went silent, and alarms stuttered before ceasing entirely. Officers scrambled, running from terminal to terminal, attempting to restore control. Their attempts were futile. The loops, glitches, and suppressed alerts had created a perfect storm of confusion. Cameras remained frozen, security logs distorted, and critical doors remained locked in automated cycles. The base had gone silent, blind and disoriented. Observed from the shadows, calm and controlled, she had orchestrated every step, predicted every reaction, and leveraged every weakness she had observed over weeks of careful study. The base, a fortress of technology and human effort, had been reduced to chaos by the smallest, most overlooked figure. She allowed herself a brief, internal acknowledgement of her success. Patience, preparation, and invisibility had won. Yet she remained vigilant. The extraction phase was imminent. Black SUVs awaited at a predetermined point outside the base, ready to remove the microdrive safely. She would not leave a trace, and she would not be seen. Her entire operation depended on timing, precision, and continued invisibility. Every second counted, every step required caution. She moved toward her planned exit route, ready for the next stage. The base personnel were in disarray. Officers shouted orders, technicians attempted reboot protocols, and guards ran corridors, unsure what to prioritize. None suspected that a single, invisible woman had orchestrated the crisis. The illusion of ordinariness had allowed her to manipulate the most sophisticated security systems, exploit human error, and maintain complete operational freedom. Every moment of silence, every flicker of a monitor, every failed alarm was evidence of her control. Paused briefly in a quiet corridor, listening to the chaos unfold, she allowed herself a faint, controlled smile. The operation was far from complete, but this was her moment. The base had become a stage, and she was the unseen conductor orchestrating a symphony of disorientation. Every detail had been accounted for, every contingency planned, every risk mitigated. Invisibility had become power, and power had been exercised with precision. As dawn approached, the base remained in turmoil. The blackout persisted, alarms remained silent, and officers scrambled to understand the scope of the disruption. Tours moved calmly, ready to extract the microdrive and leave the base before anyone could identify the true source of the chaos. She had not only infiltrated the base physically and digitally, but she had also demonstrated that appearances were deceptive, that invisibility was a weapon, and that a single, unnoticed individual could control the fate of an entire facility. She glanced back one last time at the frozen monitors, the flickering lights, and the panicked staff. A faint sense of satisfaction washed over her. Every step, every calculation, every moment of preparation had culminated in this. The base had gone silent, and the unseen cleaner had proven that patience, preparation, and precision could surpass brute force or technology. The stage was set for the final phase: escape, extraction, and disappearance. The base was in complete disarray. Alarms had failed, security cameras were frozen, and officers scrambled blindly through corridors, shouting into radios that only emitted static. Tours moved calmly through the chaos, her mop cart long forgotten, her uniform spotless, her expression that of an ordinary employee. To anyone watching, she appeared perfectly ordinary, just another face among the frantic staff. Yet every step she took was deliberate, every motion calculated, and every breath controlled. The invisible cleaner was about to vanish from their world entirely. Her first objective was to reach the central exit corridor, a stretch of hallways she had mapped with surgical precision over weeks of observation. Each door, each camera, each motion sensor had been studied in detail. She knew the exact seconds during which guards would be distracted, the precise moments when cameras would flicker or freeze, and the minor blind spots in automated patrols. This knowledge was her armor, her shield against detection, and her greatest weapon in the extraction phase. A faint hum from the servers indicated that her earlier manipulations were still in effect. Backup systems had been looped, emergency alerts suppressed, and security logs temporarily altered to mask her presence. Any officer attempting to track movements would see nothing but anomalies, inconsistencies, and delays. She moved silently, her footsteps perfectly timed to coincide with the faint hums and clicks of malfunctioning equipment. To them, she remained invisible. To her, they were blind puppets dancing to her rhythm. A sudden noise, a dropped tool from a frantic technician, made her freeze. She held her breath, allowing the sound to pass, carefully assessing the guard's proximity. His flashlight beam swept the corridor briefly, paused, and then moved on. She smiled faintly, a shadow in the corner of the hallway, a phantom among chaos. Every human reaction had been accounted for, every risk calculated. The extraction was already halfway complete, and no one had yet suspected the invisible presence orchestrating the entire operation. The extraction point was outside the main compound, where a black SUV waited in the shadows of the desert night. It was positioned to avoid perimeter patrols and motion sensors, invisible to anyone unaware of its placement. She had coordinated this with her contacts weeks before, ensuring a precise, timed rendezvous. One misstep, one hesitation, and the operation could fail. But preparation had accounted for every contingency. Her mind ran like a metronome, counting the seconds, measuring the distance, calculating every movement with perfection. The corridors were narrow, lined with fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently due to her earlier manipulations. Guards shouted orders, running from terminal to terminal, their panic growing with every failed alarm. She navigated the hallways as silently as a shadow, slipping past the blind spots she had memorized. Each turn, each step, each moment of hesitation was deliberate. The invisible cleaner had become a phantom, untouchable and unstoppable. As she approached the final internal checkpoint, a security officer blocked the path unexpectedly. Froze, her pulse steady, her expression calm. The officer glanced at her mop, assumed she was tidying the corridor, and muttered something to himself before moving aside. She allowed a faint, polite nod, a gesture entirely unremarkable but perfectly timed. Every human assumption, every reliance on appearances, worked in her favor. She had been underestimated, and that underestimation was her greatest weapon. Sliding through the doorway, she entered a service tunnel leading toward the base's outer perimeter. The tunnel was narrow, dimly lit, and lined with emergency pipes. It was a route she had scouted meticulously, memorizing every curve, vent, and maintenance panel. Her movements were fluid, silent, and invisible. Behind her, the base continued to unravel, officers chasing ghosts, technicians baffled by the frozen systems, and alarms silent. The chaos she had orchestrated provided perfect cover for her extraction. Reaching the exit point, she paused briefly, scanning the desert night. The black SUV was exactly where it should be, engine idling silently, lights off, blending into the shadows. She moved quickly but cautiously, every motion deliberate, ensuring no one outside the base could detect her presence. The desert wind masked her approach, carrying faint mechanical noises, rustling sand, and distant animal calls. It was the perfect natural camouflage. Sliding the microdrive from the concealed compartment in her mop handle, she placed it securely in a padded case in the SUV's trunk. Every byte of critical neural mapping data was accounted for, every precaution taken to prevent loss or exposure. The driver, waiting silently, gave her a brief nod. She climbed in without a sound, and the vehicle melted into the darkness, leaving the base behind, still frozen in chaos, unaware of the true scale of the breach. As the SUV accelerated into the desert, allowed herself a controlled breath. The first stage of extraction was complete. The base's most sensitive data was in her possession. Their systems had been disrupted, and their personnel had been deceived completely. The invisible cleaner had become an unstoppable force, a ghost who had walked unnoticed through corridors, manipulated systems, and outmaneuvered highly trained officers. Every second of observation, every small human error cataloged, had culminated in this moment. Yet even in the calm of the desert night, she remained vigilant. there was still a risk of trace detection, of surveillance intercepts, or of unforeseen complications. Her mind ran through the sequence once more: exit from the base, transport route, safe house, and secure handoff. Every step had been rehearsed mentally, every contingency planned. This was not a reckless operation. It was the product of weeks of preparation, meticulous observation, and flawless execution. In the distance, the base's lights flickered intermittently as the power anomalies continued to ripple through its systems. Officers were running in confusion, technicians were arguing, and alarms remained silent. The chaos was a testament to her precision, patience, and invisibility. To the world, she had been nothing more than a cleaner. But in truth, she had orchestrated an operation that would be studied by intelligence agencies for years to come. A perfect blend of observation, infiltration, and extraction. The SUV followed a pre-planned route, avoiding patrols, checkpoints, and surveillance. Remained calm, her body relaxed, but her mind alert, monitoring the surrounding desert, the timing of patrols, and the subtle environmental cues that could indicate exposure. Every instinct, every calculation, every ounce of training was in play. This was the final stage: safe extraction, disappearance, and the maintenance of invisibility even after the mission's completion. Hours later, she reached a secure safe house on the outskirts of the desert. The microdrive was removed from the vehicle and placed into a Faraday-shielded container, ensuring complete protection from interception or electronic tracking. The room was quiet, the desert wind muffled against reinforced walls, and the only sound was her own controlled breathing. The mission had been executed flawlessly, but knew that invisibility required constant vigilance. Even now she was still a shadow, unseen, untouchable, and untraceable. Sitting quietly, she reflected on the operation. The base had gone silent, their systems paralyzed by glitches and manipulated data, and yet none had suspected the true source: an invisible cleaner, underestimated, overlooked, and assumed harmless. Every move she had made had been a test of patience, precision, and intellect. The operation's success was proof that appearances could deceive, invisibility could empower, and a single person could change the course of events unnoticed. Finally, she allowed herself a faint smile. The mission was complete, the extraction successful, and the base left to scramble in confusion and frustration. The invisible cleaner had disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace, no indication of her presence, and no understanding of the true scale of the breach. Invisibility, patience, and intelligence had triumphed, and in that quiet desert safe house, Torres allowed herself the satisfaction of knowing she had been completely, utterly unstoppable. The desert sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand dunes surrounding the safe house. Torres remained seated at a reinforced table, the microdrive secure in a Faraday-shielded container. Outside, the world was waking, oblivious to the invisible storm she had orchestrated the night before. The base, a sprawling fortress of technology and personnel, had been rendered blind, silent, and disoriented. Yet no one knew who, or what, had been responsible. The invisible cleaner had vanished without a trace, leaving only chaos and unanswered questions behind. Allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Weeks of observation, infiltration, and careful manipulation had led to this moment. The meticulous hours spent memorizing patrol routes, camera angles, and blind spots had culminated in an operation that could have crippled the base entirely if executed less carefully. She had achieved her objective. The microdrive containing the AI neural mapping core data was in her possession, and the base had been forced to confront vulnerabilities they had never imagined. Her invisibility had been her greatest weapon, her patience her shield, and her intellect the blade that cut through layers of security and human error alike. News from the base trickled in over the following days. Technicians struggled to explain the anomalies, officers debated whether it was a coordinated cyber attack, and administrative staff attempted damage control. The chain of command had never faced such a perfect combination of digital manipulation and human deception. Theories circulated, ranging from internal sabotage to foreign espionage, but none came close to identifying the true operative. Every report emphasized one thing: the system had been breached in a manner so precise and calculated that it suggested an insider. Yet insiders had been accounted for. The base remained clueless. From her safe house, monitored the fallout, careful not to leave a digital trace. She watched as security analysts combed through logs, trying to find patterns, while officers struggled to regain operational control. Her heart remained steady. She had predicted every movement, every response, every assumption. The panic, confusion, and frustration of the personnel were all part of the invisible equation she had set in motion. They were reacting exactly as she had expected, proving the precision of her observation and planning. She thought briefly about the moral implications of her actions. The microdrive held highly sensitive AI neural mapping data, technology capable of autonomous decision-making, potentially affecting national security. Her goal had not been destruction but exposure, to reveal how the system, despite its sophistication, was vulnerable to human oversight and the most overlooked presence: a simple cleaner. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder that appearances could deceive, and that even the most secure environments were only as strong as the people who relied on them blindly. His mind returned to the night of infiltration. The corridors, the guards, the frozen monitors, and the subtle glitches were now memories, calculated sequences that had unfolded perfectly. She had navigated the base invisibly, extracted the microdrive, and escaped undetected. Every second of preparation, every human oversight she had cataloged, every minor glitch she had introduced had contributed to a flawless operation. She allowed herself a faint smile at the brilliance of invisibility, how it allowed her to manipulate an entire facility without ever being noticed. Over the following days, she carefully delivered the microdrive to her contacts, ensuring that the data would be protected and analyzed responsibly. The transfer was executed flawlessly, just like the infiltration. No trace of her involvement remained, no evidence linking her to the operation, and no indication that a single person had controlled events from the shadows. She had vanished as completely as she had appeared, leaving only chaos, unanswered questions, and the realization that the base's personnel had underestimated the power of the unseen. Yet did not linger in triumph. She knew that invisibility demanded vigilance. One misstep, one digital footprint, one careless interaction could unravel weeks of meticulous planning. She remained a ghost, moving unseen, unnoticed, and untouchable. Her training had taught her that success was only as lasting as the discipline required to maintain it. The world believed she was an ordinary cleaner, but she knew better. She was a strategist, an observer, and a master of invisibility. And that was a power few could ever comprehend. In the weeks following the operation, the base slowly regained operational control, unaware of the scale of the breach. Security protocols were tightened, redundancies increased, and digital audits became more frequent. Yet the personnel continued to underestimate the ordinary, trusting that their systems were impervious and that minor errors could never yield catastrophic results. Had proven otherwise, but her existence remained invisible. She was a shadow in the system, a ghost in the corridors, a silent force that had rewritten the rules of engagement without ever being seen. Her reflection wandered to the broader implications. In a world increasingly reliant on technology, the line between security and vulnerability had become razor-thin. Sophistication alone was not enough. Vigilance, observation, and humility were essential. She had exploited arrogance, routine, and predictability, demonstrating that invisibility, applied with patience and intelligence, was a more formidable weapon than brute force or even high-level technology. The lessons she imparted would remain unspoken, understood only by those who might one day observe the cracks she had exposed. Remained in the safe house, watching the horizon, letting the desert wind carry away the last remnants of tension. Her mission was complete, yet she felt no pride in the conventional sense. There was satisfaction in precision, in invisibility, in the flawless execution of a plan that had left an entire facility blind to her presence. But there was also awareness. Invisibility demanded patience, discipline, and constant vigilance. Every success was fragile, every moment of exposure potentially catastrophic. The invisible operative understood that control was fleeting, and that true mastery required the discipline to remain unseen even in triumph. Days later, news reports would emerge about unexplained glitches in the base's AI systems, anomalies in data logs, and temporary blackouts. Analysts would speculate on cyber attacks, internal sabotage, or foreign interference. Officers would debate endlessly, yet none would identify the true source. A single, unnoticed cleaner who had exploited human oversight and technological reliance to orchestrate an invisible victory. His presence would remain a secret, her role undetected, her identity hidden behind the mundane of ordinariness. Sitting quietly, she allowed herself one final reflection. The operation had demonstrated that invisibility was power, patience was precision, and observation was intelligence. The base had been outmaneuvered not by force, not by numbers, but by someone who had been assumed harmless, invisible, and ordinary. She had proven that the smallest, most overlooked presence could wield enormous influence if guided by discipline, knowledge, and foresight. Invisibility, she realized, was the ultimate form of control. The desert sun climbed higher, casting long, shifting shadows across the dunes. Tors gathered her things, her mission complete, and prepared to disappear once more into the vast, untraceable wilderness. The world remained unaware, the base remained oblivious, and the invisible cleaner had become a ghost not just in their system but in their perception. The lesson she had imparted, silent, invisible, and indelible, would remain even if her identity never surfaced. As she walked toward the horizon, blending into the morning light, she allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. The base had gone silent, the neural mapping core was safe, and the invisible operative had proven that appearances could deceive. Every second of preparation, every observed error, every carefully executed step had culminated in perfection. And though she would vanish, the impact of her actions would ripple through the base, a ghost in the system, forever unseen yet forever influential. Tors disappeared into the desert, a shadow in the light, an invisible force leaving behind chaos, unanswered questions, and an indelible proof of the power of invisibility, patience, and intelligence. She had been overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. But in doing so, she had shown the world that invisibility could conquer even the most fortified systems. And in that quiet, untraceable exit, she became a legend without a name, a story without witnesses, a presence felt only in its consequences.